Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I found out I wasn't going to Europe the same way most people find out they've been left behind these days, by scrolling through Instagram while half distracted by a cold cup of coffee and the sound of my neighbor mowing his lawn for the third damn time that week. The first photo that popped up hit me harder than a punch. My parents, my brother Derek, and a bunch of people I barely recognized, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, all smiles and matching jackets like they were posing for a goddamn Christmas card. My thumb froze over the screen, and for a second, I genuinely thought it must have been one of those throwback posts, one of those nostalgic memories people like to share when they have nothing better going on. But no, there it was, tagged and dated. Today. At first, my brain scrambled for some logical explanation, some half-baked excuse that would explain why I was sitting alone in Indiana while the rest of my family was eating croissants and drinking wine under the Parisian sun. Maybe they planned it last minute. Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe my email got lost. But deep down, way down in that place you don't like to visit unless you have to, I knew. I fucking knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. A choice. I sat there, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest like wet cement, flipping through picture after picture. There was my mom, Evelyn, wearing that ridiculous red scarf she said she was saving for something special. There was my dad, Tom, who always looked slightly uncomfortable in pictures, smiling a little too wide. And there was Derek, grinning like the king of the world, beer in hand, arm around some new girl he hadn't bothered to introduce to the family yet. Not that I would have met her anyway. I must have stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes before it even occurred to me to check my messages, my calls, anything that would show they had at least tried to reach me. Nothing. Not a text. Not a missed call. Not even a bullshit automated, wish you were here postcard. Nothing but silence and the distant whine of the neighbor's goddamn lawnmower. I should have been used to it by now. Hell, if you lined up all the times Derek got picked first and I got handed the leftovers, you could pave a 4-lane highway straight across the Midwest. But this? This was different. This was deliberate. Later that night, after enough beers to drown a small horse, I finally got up the nerve to call my mom. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless and chipper like she hadn't just kicked one of her sons out of the family vacation. "Oh, honey," she said, as if she hadn't expected to hear from me. "We were going to call you." It all happened so fast. Derek found this amazing deal, and the flights were filling up so quickly, and we didn't want to bother you. You're always so busy with work. Busy with work. That was their excuse. Like I was some distant uncle or a goddamn coworker they didn't want to inconvenience. I didn't say anything for a beat, just let the silence stretch out until she started tripping over her own words, adding more filler about logistics and timing and how they knew I wouldn't mind. It wasn't until 3 days later, when Derek himself called me half-drunk, laughing, that the truth came out. "Bro," he slurred, "I told them not to invite you, man. You're such a buzzkill. You'd have ruined it." Just like that. No hesitation, no shame. Just a casual backhand to the face, tossed out like it was nothing. I should have yelled, should have cussed him out, told him exactly where he could shove his overpriced Eiffel Tower keychain. But instead, I just hung up, calm as a corpse. Because it wasn't even rage I felt at that point. It was something colder, sharper. A kind of resignation you don't come back from. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, a memory floated up out of the dark like a body rising in a pond. It was a few years back, after Derek's third DUI and the court fines he swore he couldn't pay. I had pulled together nearly every spare dollar I had, scraping from my savings, even selling some of my own gear, to buy him a car nothing flashy, but solid enough to get him to work and back, help him stay clean, stay straight. I had done it because I thought maybe, just maybe, if someone showed him a little faith, he might turn his shit around. No one had forced me. No one had even asked me. I had just done it, because that's what family's supposed to do, right? Lift each other up? Hold each other up when the world tries to tear you down? Staring into the dark that night, the bitter taste of betrayal thick on my tongue, I realized something that made my hands curl into fists under the sheets. It wasn't just that they had left me out. It was that they had done it without a second thought, without even the barest flicker of hesitation. All that loyalty, all that sacrifice, and in the end, I was just the guy they could cross off the list when it got too crowded. They thought they knew me. They thought I would take it the way I had always taken it, quietly, politely, swallowing down my pride and my anger until it festered into something black and heavy inside my gut. But not this time. This time, something broke. Something that wasn't going to be easy to put back together. Something that maybe wasn't supposed to be fixed at all. And as I lay there, listening to the night press heavy against the windows, I started to think about that car sitting in Derek's driveway. The one he thought he could count on, just like he always counted on me. The thing about bridges is, once you burn one good and proper, it lights up the whole damn sky. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Because if family was just a word they used when it suited them, maybe it was time I redefined what that word meant for me. The morning after I decided to burn the bridge, I sat at the kitchen table nursing a stale cup of black coffee, staring at my phone like it might sprout legs and walk away. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but there was this tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering the same old poison it always had: be the bigger man. That voice had kept me chained to people who saw me as nothing more than a safety net for far too long, and as I sat there in the dim light of my tiny kitchen, I realized how tired I was of being the one who always held the line while everyone else ran wild without consequences. The thing about giving someone a gift, a real gift, one that costs you something, is that you never expect it to come back and punch you in the gut. But life's funny like that. It was about 4 years ago when Derek hit what he called rock bottom, although if you knew him, you knew he had a habit of redefining rock bottom every 6 months or so. He had racked up 2 DUIs by then, and after the third one, Mom called me crying in the middle of the night, saying Derek was facing real jail time if he didn't get his act together. They had this bright idea that if he could just get a fresh start, a clean car, a way to get to work, he could turn it all around. Dad, being dad, mumbled something about tough love but never really did anything about it, and Mom just kept repeating how we had to be there for him, like she was reading from a script she had half believed since the day Derek was born. Of course, nobody suggested they pay for it. No, that honor fell squarely on my shoulders, the responsible one, the fixer, the idiot who thought maybe this time would be different. I emptied my savings account, the one I had been building for a down payment on a house, and bought him a decent little used Toyota Corolla. It wasn't much, but it ran smooth, and more importantly, it was in my name. I told myself it was just a loan, that he would get his life together, start making payments, and I would be able to say I did something good for someone who needed it. What a goddamn fool's dream that turned out to be. The first few months were all right. Derek showed up for his court dates, worked a couple of landscaping gigs, sent me $100 here and there with promises that the big money was just around the corner. Then, just like every other time before, he got comfortable. Comfortable enough to start missing work, comfortable enough to start borrowing the car to drive to bars a few towns over, comfortable enough to forget he owed me anything at all. I watched it happen in slow motion, like a car crash you can't stop, but also can't look away from. And every time I brought it up, every time I tried to hold him accountable, the same old songs started playing: Mom's guilt trips, Dad's awkward silence, Derek's slippery charm convincing everyone that I was the one being unreasonable, that I was holding a grudge over something as small as a little car. Sitting there that morning, the sunlight bleeding weakly through the blinds, I pulled up the car tracking app one had insisted on installing when I bought the damn thing. Derek had laughed about it back then, called me paranoid, but I hadn't trusted him even then, not really. It was supposed to be a backup plan, a just-in-case measure I hoped I would never have to use. When the map loaded, I zoomed in and saw the blinking bloop, sitting in a part of town I recognized immediately, a crumbling duplex off Elm Street, the kind of place you don't go after dark unless you're looking to buy something illegal or lose your wallet. More than that, I knew exactly whose place it was. Madison Turner. Derek's ex, the one who had filed a restraining order he swore was all a big misunderstanding. The same Madison he had cried about at Christmas 2 years ago, swearing he was over her, that he was finally done with toxic people. Toxic people. The irony could have drowned a lesser man. There was no mistaking it. The car was parked there, had been parked there overnight according to the app's tracking history. That meant Derek hadn't just lied to me, he had lied to the whole family, swearing he was clean, straight, on the path to redemption. And here he was, dragging his sorry ass back to the same place, the same mistakes, dragging my sacrifices right back into the mud he loved so damn much. You ever had that moment when everything clicks into place, ugly and perfect, and you wonder how you ever missed it before? That was me, sitting there, watching the blue dot blink like some kind of cosmic middle finger. Have you ever been the one holding your family together while they ignore you? Would you have done the same if someone repaid your kindness by cutting you out like you were never there? I'm not talking about little slights. I'm talking about standing in the fire for someone while they build the damn pyre higher behind your back. I set my coffee down and stared out the window for a long time, feeling the first real crack of freedom split open somewhere deep in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Something simpler. Something cleaner. I didn't owe them anything. Not Derek. Not Mom. Not even Dad, who always found a way to disappear when things got messy. The only person I owed anything to was myself. And, for the first time in 36 years, I decided that was enough. I tapped on the app again, watching the blinking dip pulse lazily on the screen. I smiled to myself, a slow, unfamiliar kind of smile that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with letting go. If Derek wanted to pretend that car was his, maybe it was time he learned what it felt like to lose something for real. The pieces were already falling into place, and all I had to do was give them the smallest push. And God help me, I could hardly wait. After I made up my mind about the car, something inside me started to unravel in slow, deliberate strands, like an old rope finally giving way under too much weight. Once you see the truth laid bare, you start seeing it everywhere, in every corner of your past where you used to tell yourself you were just imagining things, being dramatic, taking things too personally. Sitting there at my kitchen table, the car tracker still blinking quietly on my phone screen, the memories started rising up like smoke, thick and choking, until I could barely sit still under the heaviness of it all. It started with the little things, always the little things that added up to something huge, something you could almost convince yourself wasn't real if you tried hard enough. Like when we were kids and Derek smashed Mom's favorite vase during one of his tantrums, but somehow I ended up getting blamed because I was supposed to be watching him. I was 10 years old and already learning that in our house, justice wasn't about who did what, it was about who could cry harder, who could twist the story first, who Mom loved enough to cover for and who she expected to suck it up and move on. There was the time in high school when I spent 3 months building a science project that won first place at the county fair, something I thought, naively, would finally make them look at me with the same shining eyes they always reserved for Derek. Instead, the night of the awards ceremony, they skipped the dinner to drive Derek across the state to try out for some second-string football team he never even made. I sat there in my clip-on tie, holding a plastic trophy in an empty cafeteria, while all the other parents clapped and hugged their kids like they had just won the Super Bowl. Derek always had an excuse, and if he didn't, Mom made one for him. He wasn't irresponsible, he was free-spirited. He didn't wreck the car because he was drunk, he misjudged the curve. He didn't lie about getting fired from 3 jobs in a row. The bosses were just jealous of his potential. And every time I dared to bring up the glaring unfairness of it all, Mom's voice would take on that sugary, condescending tone that made my blood boil hotter than any shouting match ever could. "Nathan," she would say, "you're just seeing things through your own lens. You've always been a little sensitive." Sensitive. Like noticing the truth was some kind of character flaw, some weakness that made me the problem instead of the endless parade of Derek's fuck-ups being excused and celebrated like charming quirks. It was funny, in a sick way, how you could spend your whole life being the dependable one, the one who showed up, who cleaned up, who shut up, and still be branded as the difficult one just because you dared to point out the cracks in the family portrait. After a while, I learned to stop mentioning it, to stop expecting anything different, because hope was just another way to get your teeth kicked in by people who would swear up and down they loved you while they twisted the knife a little deeper every year. The real kicker came about a week after I decided to sell the car. I had gone over to the house to pick up some of my old stuff from the garage, trying to get in and out without too much conversation, because frankly, I didn't trust myself not to start throwing accusations like grenades if I looked my mother in the eye for too long. I was halfway through boxing up some old yearbooks and camping gear when I heard it, the landline phone ringing inside the kitchen. I froze, not because of the ring, but because after the third ring, the machine picked up, and I heard Derek's voice pour out of the old, crackly answering machine speaker like a goddamn confession whispered into my ear. "Hey, Mom, Dad," Derek drawled, sounding half-drunk and half-smug in the way only he could pull off without immediately getting his teeth knocked out. "Just wanted to say thanks again for making this trip happen. Europe is freaking awesome. And hey, good call not inviting Nathan. Dude would have just been all serious and moody, you know? Like, we would have had to babysit him the whole time. This way's better. This way it's, like, just family. Just family." I stood there, box of dusty memories in my hands, feeling something cold and sharp slice clean through the middle of me. In that moment, it wasn't even about the trip anymore. It wasn't about the car or the money or the years of swallowing my pride like it was medicine. It was about the simple, brutal fact that in their eyes, I wasn't family, not really. I was convenient when they needed a scapegoat, useful when they needed a loan, but otherwise, I was just a weight around their necks they were happier to be rid of. I should have felt sad, maybe, or furious. But mostly, what I felt was this eerie kind of relief, like someone had finally yanked the blindfold off, and I could stop pretending not to see what was right in front of me. They didn't love me the way they loved Derek. Maybe they never had. And maybe, just maybe, that said more about them than it ever said about me. I set the box down, careful not to slam it even though my hands were shaking, and walked out of that garage with nothing but my keys in my pocket and a hole in my chest that I wasn't sure would ever close. That night, as I sat on my porch listening to the cicadas scream in the trees and watching the last red light of sunset bleed out over the fields, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to chase them anymore. I wasn't going to bend myself into shapes trying to fit into a family that had already decided I was an outsider. If they thought the world was better without me in it, well, they were about to find out what life looked like when I actually stayed gone. And it was going to start with the car, but it sure as hell wasn't going to end there. The morning I sold the car, the sky was that heavy, washed out kind of gray that made it hard to tell where the clouds ended and the land began, like the whole world had decided it was too tired to bother pretending things were all right anymore. I stood in the driveway for a long time, keys in hand, staring at the scuffed silver Corolla sitting there like a monument to every bad decision I had ever made in the name of family loyalty. It looked smaller than I remembered, sadder somehow, like even the damn car knew it had outlived its purpose. The sale itself was almost insultingly easy, like the universe had decided it owed me at least this one clean win. I had put up a listing the night before on a private car sale site, keeping it vague and simple, good condition, clear title, price to move fast. I didn't mention who really paid for it or how many lies it had carried from point A to point B. I didn't tell the eager guy who showed up with a thick envelope of cash that this car had once been a lifeline thrown to a drowning man who had never intended to swim. He looked over the Corolla with quick, efficient movements, checked under the hood, kicked the tires like he had something to prove, and handed me the cash without even trying to haggle. In less than 20 minutes, the car was gone, the driveway empty, the ghost of Derek's entitlement finally starting to loosen its grip on the place. I stood there after he drove away, the money heavy in my jacket pocket, feeling both lighter and heavier than I could explain, like I had just cut off a gangrenous limb, but could still feel it throbbing in the absence. I didn't tell anyone about the sale, not right away. I didn't feel the need to justify it or explain it or preemptively defend myself against the tidal wave of guilt trips and emotional blackmail I knew was already building somewhere just out of sight. I figured the news would travel to Derek soon enough, probably the next time he staggered out to the driveway, keys in hand, already late for whatever half-assed obligation he was planning to blow off that day. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, around dinner time, the storm hit. My phone started buzzing like it had been set on fire, call after call lighting up the screen with my mother's name, my father's number, even Derek's girlfriend chiming in at one point, all demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding that I somehow make sense of the unthinkable crime I had committed against the sacred family order. I let them all go to voicemail, setting the phone face down on the kitchen counter like it was something rotten that might infect me if I touched it too long. Eventually, the sheer volume of the ringing became impossible to ignore, and I answered, not because I wanted to talk, but because some sick part of me wanted to hear just how far they would go to twist the knife. Mom's voice hit me like a slap the moment I picked up. She didn't even say hello. No pleasantries, no soft landing. Just straight to the attack. How could you do this to your brother? She shrieked, the kind of shrill, wounded tone she usually reserved for funerals or full-blown public spectacles. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, heart thudding in my chest like a slow, angry drumbeat, and realized that she really did believe it. In her mind, I wasn't retaliating for years of being pushed aside, ignored, and dismissed. I wasn't drawing a line in the sand after a lifetime of swallowing every slight and every insult like bitter pills. No, in her eyes, I was the one committing the unforgivable sin of upsetting the delicate, dysfunctional balance that kept Derek perched on a pedestal and me chained to the floor. It's just a car, I said finally, my voice so steady it scared me a little. A car I bought. A car I paid for. A car I legally own. You know it's not about that. She screamed, voice cracking under the weight of her fury. It's about family. About loyalty. About supporting each other. I could have laughed right then, could have laughed so hard I might have broken something important inside myself. Loyalty? Support? Where had all that been when they packed their bags and flew across the ocean without so much as a text message to their firstborn son? Where had it been when Derek sneered into the answering machine about how much better things were without me? Instead of laughing, I said something I had never said to them before, something that tasted like blood and freedom all at once. I'm not part of this family anymore. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that feels almost alive, pulsing and raw with all the things left unsaid. I pictured her standing there in the living room, clutching the cordless phone, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, trying to find a way to spin the narrative, to fix the story so she could still be the victim and I could still be the villain. When no words came, I ended the call and turned my phone off completely, cutting through the noise with one simple, decisive act. I stood there for a long time afterward, staring out the window at the darkening sky, feeling 1,000 invisible chains snapping and falling away one by one. It wasn't clean, and it sure as hell wasn't painless, but it was necessary. For once, I wasn't going to let guilt and obligation dictate the rest of my life. As the first cold raindrops splattered against the glass, I realized I didn't even care what they thought anymore. Not really. Let them scream, let them cry, let them tell each other stories about how I had betrayed them. Let them build their little fortress of lies without me. Because for the first time in my life, I had finally chosen myself. And there was no going back. The silence that followed was not the peaceful, soul-cleansing kind that poets write about when they talk of finding themselves. No, this silence was thick and heavy, a silence that pressed against my chest like a pair of rough hands. squeezing until every breath I took felt like a small act of defiance. After I shut my phone off that night, I slept harder than I had in years, but when I woke up, the world outside seemed meaner somehow, like even the sun had decided it was better off hiding behind thick clouds than shining down on this mess I had created. When I finally turned my phone back on the next afternoon, the notifications hit me like a swarm of angry bees. Voicemails stacked up one after another, some just a few seconds of static and heavy breathing before someone hung up, others long, rambling tirades that shifted from pleading to blaming and back again, like a twisted emotional merry-go-round. Text messages lit up the screen in angry clusters, a mix of exclamation points, broken-hearted emojis I refused to open, and half-apologies that were really just disguised attacks. Mom was the queen of the guilt voicemails, each one more dramatic than the last, weaving a sob story about how she was losing sleep, how the family was falling apart because of my bitterness, how Derek was really hurting even if he couldn't show it. Her voice would crack at all the right places, trembling just enough to sound sincere, but underneath it all, I could hear it, the cold, hard edge of someone who still thought this was just a phase, that I would come crawling back like I always had before. Dad's messages were fewer, but somehow worse, just a few short sentences, stiff and awkward, as if he was fulfilling some obligation he didn't believe in. Call your mother. Don't let pride ruin everything. Family is more important than being right. No anger, no warmth either, just this numb sort of expectation that I would eventually cave under the weight of tradition and duty. And then there was Derek. Only one voicemail from him, but it stuck in my head like a splinter I couldn't dig out no matter how hard I tried. He was laughing when he started talking, that same grating, cocky laugh he always had when he knew he had gotten away with something. Damn, bro, he said, slurring the words slightly like he had already been drinking for a few hours. You really lost your mind, huh? Selling my car? Cutting everyone off? Bet you're sitting there feeling real righteous about it too, huh? Big man, finally grew a spine. Too bad nobody gives a shit. We're better off without your miserable ass dragging us down. He hung up after that, no goodbye, no chance to respond, just a cheap shot thrown into the void and then silence. I sat there with the phone in my hand for a long time, the buzzing of new incoming texts rattling against my palm like angry wasps trapped in a glass jar, and for a brief, dangerous moment, I almost called him back. Almost told him exactly what I thought of him, of all of them. Almost gave him the satisfaction of knowing he had gotten under my skin one more time. But instead, I put the phone down and walked away, letting it ring and buzz and scream into the empty room while I poured myself a stiff drink and stared out the window at the dying light. It was 2 days later when the real curveball came, slipping into my inbox so quietly I almost missed it altogether. An email, short and to the point, from Claire, my ex-girlfriend, the one I had dated seriously for 3 years before things fell apart in a mess of unspoken resentment and half-healed wounds. I heard what happened, the email said, just 6 words that hit harder than any of the screaming voicemails ever could. You were right about them. Call me. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, a drunken impulse she would regret in the morning. Claire and I hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she moved to Chicago and I stayed behind in the same small town that had sucked the life out of better men than me. But something about her tone, the bluntness of it, made my gut twist in a way I couldn't ignore. I waited a few hours, trying to convince myself to just delete it, pretend I never saw it, keep moving forward on the new path I had hacked out of the ruins of my old life. But curiosity, that old stubborn bastard, got the better of me, and by sunset, I found myself dialing her number with hands that didn't feel entirely steady. She picked up on the second ring, voice soft and cautious in a way that told me she wasn't sure if I would even answer, let alone listen. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes, the kind of halting, stilted conversation that people have when they know too much about each other's worst moments, but still feel some strange tug toward honesty. Then she dropped the bomb. I didn't know if I should tell you, Claire said, voice tight and brittle like a wire pulled too taut. But after everything, you deserve to know. Derek, he didn't just cause problems between us. He tried to sleep with me. More than once. While we were still together. For a second, I couldn't even process the words, couldn't fit them into the already overcrowded puzzle of betrayal and resentment that had been my life for so long. It was like someone had pulled the last brick out of a crumbling wall, and I was standing there in the dust, blinking and coughing, realizing that the foundation had been rotten all along. She went on, telling me about the drunken texts he sent late at night, the way he cornered her at family gatherings when no one was looking, the way he laughed it off when she threatened to tell me, saying nobody would believe her over him. And the worst part, the part that made my skin crawl and my stomach turn, was that she hadn't told me then because she knew, deep down, that she was right. I wouldn't have believed her. Not because I trusted Derek so much, but because the thought of admitting the truth, that my own family would turn on me like that, was too much to bear. The call ended eventually, but her words stayed with me, echoing in the hollow spaces where trust used to live. It wasn't just about the car. It wasn't even just about the trip. It was about a lifetime of choosing to see the best in people who saw nothing but a sucker when they looked at me. As I sat in the growing dark, listening to the last few crickets singing somewhere out in the fields, I realized that maybe, just maybe, losing my family wasn't a tragedy after all. Maybe it was the only real freedom I was ever going to get. And deep in my gut, I knew this wasn't the last secret waiting to crawl out of the shadows. There is a particular kind of anger that doesn't explode like a bomb, but settles in slow, creeping waves beneath your skin, turning every breath into a measured act of restraint, every heartbeat into a hollow drum of unfinished business. After I hung up with Claire that night, after her voice faded into the quiet crackle of a disconnected call, I sat there in the dark with my fists clenched tight against the arms of the old chair, feeling the truth settle into place like the final piece of a puzzle I had spent my whole life trying not to complete. It was never just about Derek being reckless or my parents being blind or even about me being too proud to forgive. It was about something so much worse, something so ugly that it had sat right there in the open for years, and I had pretended not to see it because believing in your family is a kind of religion that doesn't let you question the high priests. Claire's confession peeled back layers I didn't even realize I had built around myself. She hadn't just been a victim of Derek's selfishness. She had been a casualty of a system I had lived in my whole life, a system where Derek could do whatever the hell he wanted and the rest of us were expected to carry the shame like it was ours to bear. But the thing that gutted me the most wasn't Derek's betrayal, it was the creeping, dawning horror that my parents must have known. Maybe not every filthy detail, but enough to look the other way when it mattered most. The pieces clicked together so fast it made my head spin. I remembered a night, about 6 months before Claire and I finally split for good, when my mom had cornered me after Sunday dinner, her voice thick with that same saccharine concern she always used when she was trying to manipulate me into thinking her way. She had said something about how young relationships could be complicated and how sometimes people just aren't meant to last. At the time, I thought she was talking about me and Claire growing apart, about normal relationship troubles. Now I realized she had been laying the groundwork, softening the blow for when it all eventually blew up, not because they wanted to help me through it, but because they knew they would have to spin the story to make sure Derek came out clean. And that wasn't even the worst of it. 3 days after the call with Claire, a thick manila envelope showed up at my door, hand-delivered by a local courier service that usually only handled legal documents or urgent medical records. There was no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in my father's familiar, cramped handwriting, a handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, report cards, and checks for birthday money throughout my childhood. For a long time, I just stared at it sitting there on my kitchen counter, half expecting it to burst into flames or start screaming if I touched it. I didn't want to open it because some small, cowardly part of me knew that whatever was inside would change things again, and I was already so damn tired of change. But curiosity, spite, Maybe even a shred of hope won out in the end. Inside was a letter, thick pages filled with that same cramped handwriting, and as I unfolded them, a single photograph slipped out and floated to the floor like a falling leaf. When I bent down and picked it up, I felt the last pieces of my old world shatter into dust. It was a picture of a party, not some vague, half-forgotten family barbecue, but a full-blown bash, complete with balloons, streamers, and a huge sheet cake that read, "Congratulations, Derek," in big blue letters. I stared at it, feeling the cold rush up my spine, because I recognized the date scribbled in the corner. It was taken during the exact week Claire and I had broken up. There they all were, smiling and laughing: Derek, my parents, half a dozen cousins and family friends, even my dad's old golf buddies, all gathered to celebrate Derek getting a new job, one he never even bothered to mention to me. I remembered that week too well. I had been sitting alone in my apartment, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong with Claire, while the people who were supposed to love me were throwing a goddamn party for the brother who had stabbed me in the back. The letter explained it, or at least tried to. Dad's words were stiff and awkward, as if he didn't know how to talk about real feelings without choking on them. He said he hadn't known how bad things were between me and Derek, said he hadn't realized that Claire had been hurt, that I had been hurt, that all they had wanted was to give Derek one good day after all his struggles. He said he was sorry I hadn't been invited. He said he thought it would be easier that way. He said he thought I needed space. I almost laughed when I read that part. Space, they had called it, like cutting me out of my own family celebrations was some kind of mercy instead of a betrayal. But what hit me hardest, what rooted me to the spot and made my chest ache in a way no amount of anger ever could, was the final paragraph, scrawled so hastily it was barely legible. "I don't expect forgiveness," my father wrote. "I don't even expect you to call. I just want you to know, I always knew you were the better man. I just didn't know how to show it without losing the rest of them." There it was, laid bare in ink and cheap paper, the truth I had never wanted but always suspected. My parents hadn't failed me out of ignorance. They had failed me out of choice, out of fear, out of a desperate, cowardly need to keep the easier son happy because he was the loud one, the reckless one, the one who would make life hell if they didn't dance fast enough to keep up with his demands. And somewhere along the way, they decided that losing me was a price they were willing to pay. I set the letter down, my hands shaking not with rage, but with the deep, bone-weary sadness of someone finally, irrevocably done hoping for anything better. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew this much: whatever move I made from here, it wasn't going to be for them. It was going to be for me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. There are moments in life when the world seems to tilt ever so slightly off its axis, moments when the truth you have been circling for years finally stands up, stretches its arms, and stares you dead in the face. Sitting at my kitchen table with my father's letter spread out in front of me, I realized I was in one of those moments, one of those crossroads where you either choose to step forward into the unknown or stay shackled forever to the lies you were raised to swallow. The letter from my father was not long, but it was heavy in a way that most things he had ever said to me were not. My father was a man of few words, a man who showed his emotions with the stiffness of someone taught that silence was strength, that swallowing your pain was better than handing it to someone else. Growing up, he was the quiet shadow trailing behind my mother's louder storms, the man who nodded along with her judgments and rarely, if ever, offered an independent opinion of his own. But in this letter, written in the kind of shaky, unpracticed cursive that looked as if it physically hurt him to form the words, my father said things I had never heard from his mouth, not once in 36 years. He said he had let too much slide, that he had made peace with small betrayals because it seemed easier than standing up and starting fights that might never end. He wrote that loving your children should not have meant loving one at the expense of the other, but that somewhere along the line, that was exactly what he had done. He confessed that Derek had always been harder to love, though he never showed it, and that somewhere deep down, he had believed that Derek needed more support, more forgiveness, more second chances, while I, steady and quiet and too proud to ask for help, would somehow be fine on my own. He admitted, without dressing it up in excuses, that he had made a terrible mistake assuming that silence could hold a family together better than truth ever could. He wrote that he was sorry for the party they threw without me, sorry for the dinners and holidays where they pretended not to notice my absence getting longer and longer, the empty seat at the table becoming just another piece of the furniture. He said he had seen the way Derek treated people, the way he used charm like a weapon and guilt like currency, and still he said nothing, choosing the comfort of temporary peace over the painful work of calling things by their real names. But the part that broke something loose inside me, something I had clamped down so tightly for so long that I barely remembered it was there, came at the very end of the letter. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, his pen scratching out the words so hard they nearly tore the paper. "But I want you to know you were always the one I respected most." I read that line over and over until the letters blurred together into black smudges against the paper, until the kitchen around me dissolved into a haze of memories I didn't want but couldn't turn away from. I thought about every school play where he sat quietly while Mom gushed over Derek's newest adventure. I thought about every time he had offered me a firm, silent handshake instead of a hug. I thought about the way he never said anything when I packed up my apartment after Claire left, just stood there awkwardly like a man mourning a shipwreck he had been too scared to warn about. I realized then that maybe he had loved me the only way he knew how, quietly, clumsily, from a distance so wide it felt like indifference, but maybe was just fear. Fear that if he reached out the wrong way, he would break something between us permanently. And now, finally, he had reached out, but the distance between us was still there, a wide, empty canyon filled with years of silence and missed chances. I folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and placed it back into the envelope as if it were something fragile and sacred, something too important to crumple up or throw away, even if it hurt to look at. I did not cry. I thought maybe I should have, that this was the kind of moment where a man was supposed to cry, but all I felt was this strange, hollow peace, like standing at the edge of a battlefield long after the war is over, breathing in the smoke and knowing you survived, even if you cannot quite remember how. I did not know if I could ever forgive him. I did not know if forgiveness was even the point anymore. But for the first time, I believed that he understood, at least in some quiet corner of his heart, what he had done and what it had cost us both. The sun was setting again, casting the kitchen in long, bruised shadows when my phone buzzed against the table, breaking the stillness. For a long moment, I considered letting it go unanswered, letting it fall into the growing pile of noise I had left behind. But something in my chest nudged me forward, and I turned the phone over to look at the screen. It was my mother. A video message, not a voicemail. That was new. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the play button, heart thudding a slow, warning rhythm in my chest. Part of me didn't want to hear whatever new version of the truth she was preparing to sell me. Part of me was afraid of what might happen if I saw her crying, saw the woman who had shaped so much of my life break down in front of me. But curiosity, that stubborn, reckless thing that refuses to die even when every rational bone in your body tells you to walk away, won out once again. I pressed play. The video opened with her face, red and blotchy, eyes swollen from crying, mouth working soundlessly for a moment as if she couldn't quite figure out how to start. And then she spoke, her voice cracking and raw, a sound so unfamiliar it made my skin crawl. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said a lot of things, but even as the words poured out of her, I realized something that left me colder than any apology ever could. She was crying, yes, but not just for me. She was crying for herself, too. Because for the first time, she was realizing that maybe, just maybe, there was no fixing what had been broken. And maybe she wasn't the victim she always thought she was. The video ended, the screen fading back to black, and I sat there in the dying light, the phone heavy in my hand, knowing that whatever came next would be a road I had to walk alone. And I was ready. For the first time, I was ready. There are some moments in life that stretch on longer than they should, moments where time folds in on itself and you find yourself frozen between two impossible choices, the past and the future dangling over your head like two equally heavy chains. Sitting there on my worn-out couch, the last rays of sunlight sliding down the far wall, I stared at my phone, at the silent screen, still showing the final frame of my mother's tearful message, and I realized I had reached the moment that had been years in the making. The video had shaken something loose in me, not because it was full of truths I had been desperate to hear, but because it was full of half-truths, apologies that still hedged and twisted, grief that somehow seemed more about her loss of control than about the pain they had inflicted on me. She said she was sorry. She said she had been wrong to let Derek steer the family ship straight into a reef of resentment and betrayal. She said she knew now that they had made mistake after mistake, always thinking there would be time to fix it later, always assuming that my love for them was unconditional, infinite, something they could spend like a bottomless credit card. She even said that Derek needed help, that he was spiraling, that he had lost his way without me there to clean up after him like I always had, and maybe, just maybe, they had pushed away the only real anchor he had ever had. It was supposed to be a plea for compassion, a call to the old Nathan, the dependable one, the forgiver, the fixer. But all I heard was another variation of the same old song. Another expectation that I would set myself on fire to keep them warm. Another subtle demand that my needs, my pain, my boundaries, take a back seat to Derek's endless, gaping need for attention, validation, and forgiveness he never once thought to earn. I sat there, phone in hand, replaying her words over and over in my mind, feeling the old familiar tug of guilt and obligation gnaw at the edges of my resolve. It would have been so easy to reply, so easy to send a single text message, to pick up the phone and step back into the role I had played for so long it had almost become second nature. But deep down, beneath the guilt and the nostalgia and the aching loneliness, there was something else, something new and raw and terrifyingly fragile, the stubborn, flickering flame of self-respect, burning against the heavy winds of my past. For the first time, I didn't just want to be wanted. I wanted to be respected. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be loved not for what I could do for them, not for how easily I could be sacrificed on the altar of Derek's comfort, but for who I was, flaws and all, anger and all, brokenness and all. And the hard, bitter truth was that they had never really done that. Not once. Not fully. Not without conditions or expectations or strings attached so tightly they could choke the life out of you if you weren't careful. The phone buzzed in my hand, a new message flashing across the screen, another missed call from Mom, another voicemail from Dad, even a text from Derek that just said, "Grow up and call us." I stared at it, feeling the weight of it, the tangled mess of loyalty and anger and grief pulling me in every direction at once. I opened the text app, my thumb hovering over the screen, the little blinking cursor waiting for me to breathe life back into a relationship that had suffocated me for so long. I thought about all the times I had forgiven them without an apology. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my pride, my hurt, my truth, just to keep the peace they had never once truly offered me. I thought about the boy I had been, the young man, the grown man, always waiting for someone to notice he was hurting, always hoping that love would come rushing in to fill the cracks before it was too late. And then I thought about the man I wanted to be now, a man who didn't need to beg for scraps of affection from people who only remembered he existed when they needed something. My finger hovered over the reply button, trembling slightly, the final choice balanced on a knife's edge between past and future, forgiveness and finality. I could have replied. I could have sent a message full of cautious hope or weary resignation, opening the door once again to the same cycle that had broken me so many times before. But I didn't. I set the phone down on the table with slow, deliberate care, as if it were a bomb I had just defused by the slimmest margin. I leaned back into the couch, closing my eyes, listening to the steady thud of my own heartbeat, the first real sound of peace I had heard in what felt like forever. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe they would move on without me, telling themselves whatever stories they needed to believe to make my absence bearable. Maybe Derek would spiral even further, dragging the whole damn house of cards down with him. Maybe someday I would pick up the phone, reach out across the broken bridge, and try to find my way back to them. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of one that was finally mine and mine alone. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody reds, and I sat there in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of everything I had lost and everything I had chosen to leave behind. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I just felt free. The phone buzzed again on the table, a sharp, insistent sound cutting through the quiet. But I didn't pick it up. I let it ring. And then, slowly, with a calm I didn't know I possessed, I turned it off, silencing the noise, the guilt, the endless, clawing demands for a forgiveness they had never truly earned. The screen went dark, the room followed suit, and I sat there, alone but not lonely, strong in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. Was it revenge? Was it healing? Was it something messier, something that didn't fit neatly into the categories we like to carve out for closure and redemption? I didn't know. And maybe, for the first time in my life, that was exactly the point.